ChatGPT Ja Noi. The dazzling lobby of the Grand Ormond Hotel was packed with the city's elite. Millionaires, celebrities, and influencers all mingling beneath sparkling chandeliers. Suddenly, a hush fell over the glittering crowd as billionaire real estate tycoon Alistair Harrington entered, his perfectly tailored charcoal suit emphasizing his magnetic presence. Cameras exploded with flashes, capturing every confident step. Yet no one in that elegant gathering could have guessed that tonight, beneath Alistair's polished veneer and practiced charm, would unfold a scandal so shocking it would become tomorrow's headline news. Alistair moved effortlessly through the admiring crowd, flashing charismatic smiles while his eyes discreetly searched the lavish foyer. They settled on Dahlia Chung, the glamorous, rising art curator dressed provocatively in a silver gown, shimmering under the ornate lights. She returned his gaze with a knowing smile that made Fiona Harrington's heart stop cold. Unnoticed by Alistair, Fiona, his pregnant wife, had quietly arrived, standing frozen just steps behind him. Her elegant black evening gown could not conceal the tremble of betrayal coursing through her body as Alistair embraced Dahlia in an intimate, unmistakably affectionate hug. Gasps rippled through the astonished crowd as cameras rapidly captured the devastating moment. The charismatic billionaire openly showing affection to another woman, utterly unaware that his devoted wife was watching helplessly from mere feet away. Comment 1 if you think Fiona should leave immediately, or 2 if you want her to confront Alistair publicly. Fiona Harrington was no ordinary billionaire's wife. The Harringtons were no ordinary couple. Fiona, formerly Fiona O'Dwyer, hailed from a modest town in Ireland. Through grit and ambition, she had earned an MBA from a prestigious university in the UK before meeting Alistair Harrington at a posh charity function in London. The attraction between them was instant yet paradoxical. His world was crystal decanters and old-world wealth, while hers was academic awards and scholarships. Despite the stark differences, love, and perhaps a longing for stability drew them together. Soon, every tabloid splashed the images of their extravagant wedding across front pages. Fiona in a lavish gown, Alistair in white tie, fireworks illuminating the sky as they exchanged vows on the sprawling lawn of the Harrington ancestral estate. Over time, Fiona had become a beloved figure in the upper echelon of society. She carried herself with quiet grace, preferring to avoid the spotlight but still excelling in the philanthropic sphere, teaming with nonprofits and organizing benefit galas that helped countless lives. Even so, in the past few months, Fiona felt a wedge forming between her and Alistair. He had grown distant, coming home late, peppering conversations with half-answers or vague references to major new deals. Occasional trips, supposedly for business in Dubai or Zurich, lengthened to a point that rattled her. By the time she discovered she was pregnant, communication had degraded into shallow pleasantries. On that day in the Grand Ormond Hotel, Fiona's worst fears materialized before a sea of cell phones and wide eyes. She froze, her heart clenching, as she watched her husband share a seemingly affectionate hug with Dahlia, the rumored mistress. Dahlia had the grace of a runway model, a sharpened gaze that quietly screamed ambition, and a circle of admirers that included influential gallerists and foreign investors. The gossip columns had been speculating about Alistair's closeness to her for weeks, but Fiona had tried desperately to believe there was some innocent explanation, an art acquisition, a corporate tie-in. Now everything she'd feared was bursting to the surface. As Alistair and Dahlia suddenly realized who was standing behind them, Dahlia's mouth curled into the slightest smirk, a fleeting sign that Fiona instantly recognized as a silent triumph. Meanwhile, a stunned hush fell over the crowd, and Fiona felt her entire life's stability threatening to crack like thin ice beneath her feet. That night, Fiona's phone erupted with messages. Some came from well-meaning friends who had witnessed the incident and wanted to show support. Others came from so-called friends, curious to pry every lurid detail out of her. Even members of the press, once cordial at society events, bombarded her with calls. She ignored them all. Instead, she sat alone in the penthouse library, a place that once brought her solace, its mahogany shelves stacked with first-edition classics, its stained glass windows framing the moonlit skyline. She kept replaying Alistair's embrace with Dahlia, the angles of their arms, the closeness of their bodies. A swirl of betrayal and heartbreak forced tears to spill. Alistair eventually came home around midnight, tried to find Fiona in the labyrinth of rooms, and discovered her in the library. He was disheveled, hair ruffled, and tie undone. Gone was the suave frontman for Harrington International. In his place stood a deeply anxious man who could barely meet his wife's eyes. Fiona recalled how once, early in their courtship, Alistair had confided that beneath his polished exterior, he'd always feared being inadequate. He dreaded letting down his late mother's legacy, and he worried about the demands of a family business that spanned continents. Now he was letting Fiona down in the worst way imaginable. In a tremulous voice, he insisted that nothing was as it seemed. Dahlia and I are dealing with high-stakes acquisitions. She's connected to key investors, Alistair said, reaching for Fiona's hand, only to have her withdraw. She asked, "So hugging is part of the negotiation package?" Her question sliced through his excuses. He stammered, It was a moment of poor judgment. Fiona felt bile rise in her throat. She wanted to scream, but with her pregnancy, the doctor had warned her to avoid severe stress. She tried to breathe, to quell the shaking in her hands. The tension between them was palpable. And in that bruising silence, Fiona realized something. The life she was building with this child growing inside her suddenly felt overshadowed by a precarious question. Could the father even be trusted? The next morning, the tabloids did what tabloids do. They exploded with scandal. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire Harrington's hotel hug, wife blindsided." Social media turned savage, posting freeze frames of Alistair and Dahlia in the Grand Ormond's lobby. Comment threads erupted with speculation about the mistress and sympathy for the humiliated wife. Every detail was devoured and dissected, from the color of Dahlia's gown to the horrified expression on Fiona's face. Holed up in the penthouse, Fiona felt like the walls were closing in. She switched on the morning news and immediately regretted it. Panelists debated the moral failings of ultra-wealthy men who believe they can have it all. If allegations are true, one commentator said, it's no surprise that a man with so many resources might also think he can keep secrets. Others used the moment for more sensational gossip, speculating that Dahlia Cheng wasn't just a casual fling, but a cunning strategist vying for access to Alistair's empire. Desperate for truth, Fiona began sifting through every corner of her life with Alistair. She discovered that he'd purchased properties in exotic locales, places he'd never mentioned, and had scheduled private flights under the guise of charity events. Worse, the Harrington staff, chefs, cleaners, assistants, who once greeted her warmly, now acted awkward, as though they tiptoed around a ticking bomb. Fiona's best friend Colette Madsen, a marketing executive known for saying things bluntly, insisted over the phone, "You need to talk to someone who can handle these complexities. This is above my pay grade, Fee." That was how Fiona first heard the name Gareth Stone, a discreet private investigator who had solved some of the wealthiest families' worst nightmares: embezzlement, blackmail, extramarital tangles that spilled into corporate sabotage. Colette insisted Gareth was the best. If you want the unvarnished truth, he'll get it, no matter the cost. Fiona hesitated. The idea of prying further into Alistair's life felt invasive. They were supposed to be equals after all, partners in every sense. But the haunting memory of Dahlia's smirk clung to Fiona's thoughts. If there was more to discover, she owed it to herself and to her unborn child to find out. 2 afternoons later, Fiona mustered the courage to contact Gareth Stone. They agreed to meet at a modest cafe off a quiet street in Upper Manhattan, far from the glittering enclaves where Harrington International was a household name. Dressed simply in a dark coat, Fiona arrived early, hoping to avoid paparazzi or any curious socialite. She had barely settled into a booth when Gareth walked in. He was taller than she'd expected, his build sturdy, his gaze sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. There was an air of calm efficiency about him, like a man who'd learned to remain unflappable under pressure. After they exchanged polite greetings, Gareth leaned forward. "I've done preliminary checks," he said, tapping a small folder. "Alistair's work often takes him around the globe, but lately I see flights booked under his name that don't align with Harrington International's official schedule. Notably, some of these flights coincide with Miss Dahlia Cheng's appearances, art expositions in Hong Kong, private showings in Milan. Definitely suspicious." Fiona inhaled sharply, dread coiling in her stomach. "Are you certain Dahlia was with him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Gareth slid a photograph across the table. Alistair, clad in a crisp suit, stepping out of a limousine. Dahlia stepping out of the same vehicle, just seconds later. The timestamp placed them in Hong Kong a month earlier, during a supposed Harrington board meeting that Fiona knew nothing about. As she stared at the evidence, tears threatened to spill. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Gareth's attempt at comfort. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Sometimes the truth is tougher than the suspicion." Fiona swallowed hard, forging her voice into resolve. "Keep digging," she said. "I need to know everything." Ekidoi. They parted ways, and Fiona remained in the cafe for a moment, letting her eyes wander over the wallpaper's floral patterns. She felt a profound sense of loss, but also a spark of determination. Yes, it was devastating to see proof that Alistair was lying. But if Dahlia's claws reached beyond a mere affair, if corporate malfeasance or blackmail were involved, Fiona would protect herself and her child at all costs. Viewer engagement moment, feeling Fiona's pain. Comment with a heart if you hope she finds clarity soon. Returning to the penthouse, Fiona tried to act composed, but every detail of the lavish space now felt tainted. Gilded picture frames and plush rugs that once symbolized success reminded her of how easily illusions shatter. That night she found Alistair in the study, bent over a desk cluttered with folders and a half-empty whiskey glass. Her presence startled him. "You're still up?" he asked, his tone uneasy. She held his gaze, searching for a hint of remorse. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm yet firm. She placed Gareth's photograph on the desk. Alistair's eyes flared in recognition. For a moment, words failed him. "Fiona," he started, sounding defeated. "It's not as straightforward as you think." She cut him off. "Then explain why you're taking trips with Dahlia Cheng. And be honest, I can't handle any more half-truths." Her voice cracked slightly as she recalled how, just days ago, they'd been smiling for a fundraiser photo, presenting themselves as the golden couple. He exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I got in deeper than I intended. Dahlia has connections to major investors who promised to funnel money into our newest hotel expansions. At first, it seemed legit. She's an influential curator, after all. But then lines blurred. I couldn't walk away without jeopardizing deals worth hundreds of millions. He paused, swallowing hard. She got too close. I let it happen." Fiona's heart twisted. "So greed was the reason?" She spat, anger flaring. "Money, investors, expansions. Did those matter more than me? More than our child?" She pressed a protective palm over her belly. A tear threatened to spill from Alistair's eye. "It was never just the money. I'm terrified of being a failure, of losing the legacy my father spent decades building." Dahlia sensed that fear. She offered solutions, but they came with strings attached. For the first time in months, Fiona glimpsed genuine vulnerability in him. It enraged and softened her in equal measure. She turned away, her chest tight. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, exhaustion seeping into her bones. Alistair reached for her, but she stepped back. The space between them felt immeasurably vast, filled with countless lies and the uncertain path forward. Over the following week, Fiona's pregnancy symptoms intensified. Morning sickness accompanied by sudden waves of fatigue and anxious thoughts that crowded her mind. She had scheduled a routine checkup with her obstetrician, something she always found comforting. Dr. Morell's office smelled faintly of lavender, and the pastel walls offered a respite from the swirling drama. The doctor examined Fiona and confirmed that physically, the baby was doing well, but Fiona's blood pressure readings were creeping higher. Stress, Dr. Morell warned, can have real effects on pregnancy. Stepping out of the clinic, Fiona's phone buzzed with another message from Gareth Stone. He requested an urgent meeting. They agreed to see each other at a small public garden near Riverside. Fiona noticed the tension in Gareth's shoulders the moment he arrived. He handed her a sealed envelope. "Dahlia isn't just leveraging your husband's desire for business expansion," he explained quietly. "She's been tied to suspicious offshore accounts used to launder money under the guise of selling high-end sculptures." Fiona's eyes widened. "Laundering? Are you certain?" Gareth nodded. "My sources say Dahlia's recently been in contact with a powerful international figure, rumored to handle dirty money through art auctions. More concerningly, some of these transactions are linked to Harrington International subsidiaries. If the authorities investigate, Alistair could be implicated. Possibly you too, if your name appears anywhere in the corporate structure. The magnitude of it all hit Fiona like a blow. If Dahlia's scheme unraveled, Alistair might face criminal charges. Their entire fortune, even the philanthropic foundations, could collapse under fines and legal battles. And yet the risk to Fiona's personal standing was equally real. Her child's future might be shaped by disgrace rather than the legacy she once imagined. Fiona wrestled with the urge to scream or cry. Instead, she clenched her jaw and said, "Let's keep gathering proof. I need to know exactly what Dahlia's involvement is. I won't be used as collateral in this twisted game." Gareth nodded, promising to dig deeper. As he walked away, Fiona heard the distant hum of city traffic and felt a strange calm settle over her. She was about to step into a storm, but at least now she was determined to navigate it on her own terms. In a desperate attempt to shield Fiona from further scrutiny, Alistair arranged a weekend trip to their countryside manor, a sprawling estate about 2 hours from the city. It was a place they rarely visited, a quiet sanctuary set amid rolling hills and centuries-old oaks. He claimed it would help Fiona relax. Privately, she suspected he was running from the spotlight that had become all too harsh in Manhattan. They arrived late Friday evening, the caretaker greeting them with a warm smile. The manor's architecture harkened back to a genteel past. High ceilings, antique furniture, and extensive rose gardens that had once been Fiona's pride and joy. But the distance from the city offered no real escape from their problems. In hushed corners, Fiona and Alistair continued tense discussions, each trying not to break under the pressure of Dahlia's threat. That first morning, Fiona woke to the sight of dawn light slicing through embroidered curtains. Alistair was already outside, pacing near the stables, phone in hand. She watched him from the window, noticing how his body language alternated between defeat and anger. Only once the morning dew burned away did he come in, face etched with worry. "Dahlia contacted me again," he murmured as Fiona sipped her tea. "She insinuated that if we don't keep funneling money into her art installations, she'll leak private photos of us to the press." Fiona's stomach twisted, but she masked her panic. "Then we have to make sure her blackmail won't stand," she said softly. "I have an investigator, Alistair. Gareth Stone. We've discovered a lot about her shell companies and questionable funds. The best defense against her extortion is the truth, even if it's ugly." Alistair sank into a chair, shoulders slumped. In that moment, he looked every bit the wounded man he was. "I should have listened to you sooner. I let her get close, and now she's turned on me." Fiona swallowed back her anger, focusing on the baby in her belly. She couldn't ignore that Alistair's downfall might also be her own if Dahlia's vendetta continued to spiral. Overcoming her wave of hurt, Fiona placed a cautious hand over Alistair's. For the sake of their child, she had to find a way forward, one that might require exposing Dahlia to the world. "Check in. Are you invested in seeing Dahlia's downfall? Share where you're reading from. We'd love to know." By Monday, they returned to the city. Fiona had expected more paparazzi lurking outside the penthouse, but the press had pivoted to a new scandal involving a Hollywood actress. While that gave her a temporary reprieve, it also meant Dahlia had more room to maneuver without the immediate glare of the media. Colette Madsen visited one afternoon, bringing homemade pastries in a transparent attempt to comfort Fiona. Over warm mugs of chamomile tea, Fiona revealed the latest revelations about the money laundering trail. Colette's mouth formed a worried line. "You can't handle this alone," she admonished. "Have you spoken to a lawyer?" That single question propelled Fiona to schedule a consultation with Iris Caldwell, a famed attorney known for handling high-profile corporate disputes. Alistair found out only after Fiona had made the appointment. Surprisingly, he didn't protest. Perhaps he realized how precarious their situation had become. Fiona arrived at Iris's sleek office on the 40th floor of a towering midtown building. The waiting area overlooked the entire city, a vista that might have reassured Fiona at another time. Iris herself was formidable, short, impeccably dressed, with a gaze that seemed to size up every hidden angle. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Fiona explained the entire story, from the moment she suspected Alistair's betrayal to the revelations about Dahlia's questionable art empire. Iris listened intently, jotting down notes. "If you're concerned that your husband is involved in illicit financial activity," Iris began, "we need to get ahead of this. By presenting evidence of blackmail and questionable transactions, we can demonstrate that Alistair was coerced, but it's not guaranteed. The authorities could probe deeper, and if they find direct ties to Alistair's accounts, there may be legal consequences. Fiona's chest tightened. What about my position and our baby's future? Would I be liable for anything if we share assets? Iris considered carefully. If your name is not on the suspect accounts, you might be protected, but you must be prepared for a rough fight. Dahlia seems the type to go scorched earth if cornered. Fiona nodded, feeling a swirl of anxiety. She realized they were standing on the precipice of a battle that could reshape her entire life. That evening, Alistair found Fiona in the nursery they had begun preparing. A room painted in soft yellows, adorned with plush lambs and star decals on the ceiling. It was the only space in the penthouse that felt peaceful. He knocked gently, stepping in. "I'm sorry," he said in a hushed tone, eyes lowered. "I've dragged you into a nightmare. I should never have let Dahlia manipulate me. I was weak, or reckless, maybe both." Fiona turned from the crib she was examining. Her expression was solemn. "I'm not the one you need to apologize to most," she replied, stroking her belly. "But I appreciate you saying it." Her voice was calmer than she felt. Inside, a tumult of betrayal and heartbreak still churned. Alistair tentatively approached, resting his palm on her stomach. Fiona let him. The baby responded with a soft kick, a tiny reminder that there was something precious worth salvaging amid all this ruin. For a moment, they shared a silence charged with unspoken remorse and concern for the future. He finally broke the hush. "I want to fix this," he murmured. "I might need to testify if authorities investigate Dahlia. We'd have to open our financial records, reveal every corner of our empire to prove we were manipulated. It could mean massive backlash from my board of directors, investors, even potential arrests. But if it clears me of wrongdoing and stops Dahlia, I'm willing to do it." "Aha," Fiona blinked, tears threatening. "You'd risk everything?" He nodded, guilt shadowing his face. "It's either that or letting her blackmail us forever, controlling Harrington International until she squeezed every drop of power and money from it." There, in the half-furnished nursery, they reached a fragile alignment. The path ahead would require total transparency, something Alistair had withheld for so long. It meant trusting Fiona with every detail of his corporate dealings. For Fiona's part, it involved opening her heart to the possibility that Alistair might still become the partner she'd believed him to be, albeit scarred by his mistakes. As they stood together, hands interlinked, a rare sense of partnership flickered. For the sake of their child, they would stand against Dahlia. The real question was, would that stance be too little, too late? While Alistair prepared to expose himself to legal scrutiny, Gareth Stone continued his investigation, unearthing more sinister connections in Dahlia's network. Some of Dahlia's largest art sales were to obscure buyers in Eastern Europe and Asia, many of whom had ties to suspect shell corporations. These corporations funneled money back into accounts partially linked to Harrington International. Gareth noticed a recurring pattern. Sums would appear in an offshore trust under Alistair's name, then quickly transfer to an account Dahlia controlled. If this pattern became public, it would look like Alistair was an active participant in art-based money laundering. Fiona kept up her routine as best she could. Prenatal yoga, healthy meals, and enough rest to manage her mounting stress. But she found every day she worried a little more about her unborn child. One morning as she performed a simple relaxation exercise, her phone buzzed with a cryptic text. "The window is closing. You and Alistair should learn your place." Fiona's blood ran cold. Dahlia was clearly warning her to stay silent. Anxiety surged when Colette dropped by and found Fiona shaking in the hallway. "It's a threat," Fiona told her friend, showing the text. "She's upping the ante." Colette, never one to mince words, replied, "Then it's time you two push back. Hard." Following that advice, Fiona took an unprecedented step. She convinced Alistair to hold a meeting with Iris Caldwell, Gareth Stone, and Owen Chang, a forensic accountant recommended by Iris. In a quiet conference room perched high above the city, they laid out every transaction, every suspicious flight itinerary, every blackmail threat. Owen, a meticulous man with a calm demeanor, sorted through the ledgers and digital prints. "We can prove a money trail that Dahlia orchestrated," he said at last, "but Alistair's name appears on multiple documents. A skilled prosecutor might claim he was a willing accomplice. Alistair's face grew pale. He'd known the risk, but seeing it spelled out was crushing. Fiona stared at the table, her stomach churning. The ramifications were immense. If Dahlia pulled the trigger, the Harrington name could be tarnished forever. Yet if they capitulated to her demands, it would never end. They had no choice but to proceed, hopefully swiftly, before Dahlia could strike again. Just as the legal team was plotting their next moves, Dahlia made a bold public statement. Appearing at a prestigious art gala in the heart of the city, she unveiled an audacious new sculpture collection, and then teased the existence of private documents, implicating certain elite investors in wrongdoing. The press went wild, speculating that she had definitive proof of criminal partnerships with high-profile figures. Although she never mentioned Alistair by name, the message was painfully clear to anyone closely following the scandal. Fiona watched the coverage from the penthouse, the knot in her stomach tightening. Dahlia was threatening to drop a bombshell of her own if the Harringtons dared to move against her. But unlike before, Fiona no longer felt helpless. She was part of a team now, an alliance forged by necessity, determined to rip away the shadows behind Dahlia's success. Following the gala, Alistair received an email from Dahlia's personal account. The subject line read, "Before I ruin you." Its contents were even more chilling, filled with insinuations that unless Alistair confessed to orchestrating the laundering scheme himself, Dahlia would share every incriminating photo, invoice, and text with federal authorities. The malicious brilliance was clear. She wanted to paint herself as the victim, forcing Alistair to take the fall. But Dahlia's manipulative bravado had the opposite effect on Fiona. For too long, she'd nursed heartbreak, weighed down by the confusion of how Alistair could betray her. Now her sorrow transformed into steel-edged resolve. She convinced Alistair to finalize an affidavit with Iris Caldwell. They would stake their reputation on the claim that Dahlia had tricked Alistair into signing documents, forging his name on others, and funneling illicit cash through Harrington's subsidiaries. It was a narrow path, but as Owen Chang systematically compiled the evidence, a pattern emerged that could help exonerate Alistair, if they could get it into the hands of investigators before Dahlia's next move. Time was short. Dahlia thrived on theatrics, and her threats typically escalated quickly. Fiona was determined they wouldn't be caught off guard again. Engagement prompt: "Are you hoping for a dramatic courtroom showdown or a quiet resolution?" Comment: "Courtroom or quiet." In the weeks that followed, Fiona waged an internal war between exhaustion and determination. Being heavily pregnant only magnified every emotion. She spent her days shuttling between her obstetrician and strategy sessions with Iris Caldwell, her nights alternating between restless sleep and anxious wakefulness. Alistair tried to be supportive, cooking meals, massaging her shoulders, staying by her side at doctor's appointments, but their unspoken tension still lingered. Love and betrayal coexisted in an uneasy truce. Then, in a twist of fate, the press pounced on a new lead. A rumor that Dahlia Cheng was spotted meeting with an international oligarch named Roman Yusupov, infamous for questionable real estate ventures and alleged ties to smuggling rings. Gossip columnists speculated that Dahlia might be expanding her money laundering operations beyond art, potentially exploiting real estate as well. Such rumors only fueled Fiona's resolve. If Dahlia had become entangled with even more nefarious players, time was of the essence. Alistair's father, Bartholomew Harrington, a venerable figure with declining health, also learned of the scandal through hushed hallway conversations. One evening, he summoned Fiona and Alistair to his private study. Surrounded by old family portraits and the faint smell of pipe tobacco, Bartholomew's frail appearance masked a core of iron. "I have shaped Harrington International over decades," he said, voice trembling but resolute. "If you two don't confront this threat, it may destroy everything I've built." Fiona realized that even in his fragile state, Bartholomew placed the family empire above all else. It stung, but it also reminded her how deep the Harrington legacy ran. The question haunted her: could they salvage this legacy without sacrificing themselves entirely? Gareth Stone arrived later that same night, laden with a thick manila folder. Inside were carefully outlined text messages, recorded calls, and bank statements, each linking Dahlia to dangerous figures like Roman Yusupov. "We're racing the clock," Gareth warned. "If we don't present this to authorities first, Dahlia's side of the story could dominate. She'll cast Alistair as the mastermind, and you'll be left cleaning up the wreckage. Fiona steeled herself. Weighing loyalty, love, and her child's future, she uttered 4 words that sealed their path. We go to court. The legal storm that followed surpassed Fiona's worst nightmares. Through Iris Caldwell's connections, they secured a meeting with key officials at the district attorney's office. Under oath, Alistair laid bare his side of the story, providing evidence gathered by Owen Chang and Gareth Stone that hinted at Dahlia's manipulations. He revealed contracts that he'd signed, believing them to be legitimate, only to discover they channeled funds into Dahlia's shell companies. Fiona supplied her own statements about the blackmail attempts, referencing the ominous messages Dahlia had sent. It took days for the DA's investigators to comb through the piles of documents. Meanwhile, Dahlia displayed an almost theatrical flair, releasing cryptic social media posts about fighting false accusations and telling her truth soon. Her supporters in the art world rallied around her, claiming that as a young, ambitious artist, she was an easy scapegoat for a failing billionaire empire. But behind that public show, Dahlia's private channels ran silent. No more blackmail emails arrived. No harassing texts flooded Fiona's phone. Perhaps Dahlia sensed that this was now a matter for the courts, a place where cunning had limits. Finally, the DA's office signaled their intent to open a formal investigation. The press sniffed out the story, splashing headlines about a pending inquiry into art-related financial crimes. Speculation soared. Would Dahlia be charged? Would Alistair be indicted as an accomplice? Harrington International's stock wobbled under the weight of the rumors. Board members questioned Alistair's leadership. Major investors whispered about reorganization. Bartholomew Harrington, frail but fierce, made a rare public statement urging patience, confidence, and moral clarity. All the while, Fiona felt her baby's stronger kicks, a constant reminder that time was moving forward. Her due date approached, a few weeks away now. The physical discomfort of late pregnancy blended with the emotional exhaustion of constant legal updates. Despite it all, she clung to a fragile hope. If they succeeded in exposing Dahlia, perhaps she and Alistair could rebuild what had been broken. Or at least they might find peace in the knowledge that they hadn't let themselves be controlled by a ruthless manipulator. One crisp autumn morning, Fiona and Alistair stood on the courthouse steps, cameras clicking from every direction. Journalists shouted questions, hoping to spark a dramatic soundbite. A swirl of protesters and curious onlookers formed a chaotic perimeter. This was a preliminary hearing, set to determine whether the DA had sufficient cause to file charges against Dahlia Cheng, and possibly Alistair himself. Iris Caldwell walked ahead like a general leading an army, her expression steely. Gareth Stone and Owen Chang followed, each carrying crucial files. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with tension. Dahlia arrived under heavy guard, wearing a sleek black suit and large sunglasses, her lips set in a confident line. She flashed a tight smile at the cameras before stepping through the courtroom doors. Fiona clenched her fists, recalling how Dahlia had once smirked that same way in the Grand Ormond Hotel lobby. This time, however, Dahlia's smugness carried a hint of unease. The session began with the judge acknowledging the gravity of the case. The DA's representative laid out initial findings: suspicious art transactions, shell corporations, questionable ledger entries. Alistair's attorney countered that Dahlia had orchestrated these deals, capitalizing on Alistair's trust and forging certain documents. When asked to address the blackmail allegations, Dahlia's counsel tried to dismiss them as unsubstantiated and far-fetched, claiming Dahlia was a victim of a powerful billionaire seeking a scapegoat for his own illegal dealings. Throughout the arguments, Fiona focused on her breathing, a technique she'd learned in prenatal classes. The baby inside her seemed to stir in reaction to the electric tension. She cast a glance toward Dahlia, noticing the faintest flicker of panic behind those dark glasses, an acknowledgement that perhaps the walls were closing in. After several hours of back and forth, the judge concluded that there was enough evidence to move forward. A formal investigation into Dahlia's finances was authorized, and Alistair's involvement would be scrutinized too. While it wasn't a definitive victory, it was a critical step toward unveiling the truth. The room erupted in clamor. Dahlia's attorneys looked rattled. Alistair exhaled heavily, relief mixing with dread. And Fiona? She felt a surge of cautious optimism. Finally, Dahlia would be forced into the light. Engagement prompt. This hearing is intense. Are you on Team Fiona or Team Dahlia? Post a quick comment. Back at the penthouse that evening, Fiona collapsed onto a sofa. Her feet ached from pregnancy weight, her head throbbed from the courthouse spectacle, and her emotions were all over the place. Alistair brought her a glass of water, then sat beside her, gingerly taking her hand. "We got one step closer today," he said, voice tinged with exhaustion. "But I know it's not over." Fiona nodded, massaging her temples. The reality weighed on them both. There would be depositions, possible forensic audits, maybe even a full trial if Dahlia dug in her heels. And all this while, Fiona's due date loomed like a beacon on the horizon. "You need rest," Alistair said, concern lining his features. "The baby needs you healthy." She looked at him, remembering the first time they'd met at a charity fundraiser in London. He was radiant with confidence, charming donors with ease. She was the shy but ambitious scholarship student, unsure if she fit in that glittering crowd. Now, after all the heartbreak and revelations, they were undeniably bound by a crisis that dwarfed anything they had faced before. Yet Fiona couldn't ignore the pockets of tenderness emerging in Alistair again, fragments of the man she once loved wholeheartedly. They spent the next few days sifting through corporate documents with Owen Chang, analyzing every contract Dahlia had touched. More suspicious links emerged: wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, inflated invoices for sculptures that never materialized. With each new piece of evidence, the argument that Dahlia was a mastermind, not merely a collaborator, grew stronger. But strong enough to shield Alistair? That remained uncertain. Gareth Stone also reported that Dahlia's social circle was fraying. Former allies whispered they didn't want to be associated with her shady deals. A few who'd invested in her art complained about unfulfilled promises. All signs suggested that Dahlia was cornered. Yet a cornered opponent can be the most dangerous. Fiona braced for some last-ditch attack, perhaps another leak of damning photos, or an attempt to cast Alistair as a manipulator who targeted Dahlia romantically for his own gain. Every scenario made Fiona's blood run cold. Late one afternoon, a letter marked "Confidential" appeared at Harrington International's executive reception. It was delivered by an unremarkable courier, which raised suspicion. Alistair opened it in the privacy of his top-floor office, with Fiona, Iris Caldwell, and Gareth Stone present via speakerphone. The letter was from Dahlia's legal representatives. In measured language, it proposed an out-of-court settlement. Dahlia would leave the country and relinquish any claim to Harrington assets, provided that Alistair publicly assume responsibility for the questionable art deals, painting Dahlia as a naive artist misled by corporate sharks. Alistair was to sign a statement declaring that Dahlia had no knowledge of illicit financial activity. In return, Dahlia would promise to keep personal photos and videos sealed away permanently. Fiona felt a fresh wave of nausea. This was a final attempt to twist the narrative, letting Dahlia slip away without facing the consequences. Gareth's voice crackled over the line. "Do not sign anything without discussing with the DA's office. This letter screams desperation but also cunning. She's trying to protect herself at your expense." Iris agreed, calling Dahlia's tactic a blatant attempt at rewriting the story. For a moment, Alistair stared at the sheet, jaw tense. "If I don't sign, she could still use whatever blackmail she has left," he muttered. "But if I do sign, I'll be forever implicated, and the DA's investigation might turn on me. The board of Harrington International would never trust me again." Fiona placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're too far in to back down now. Lying to shield Dahlia means letting her walk free to do this again, perhaps to someone else, in another city. Our baby deserves a future without this cloud of corruption. And you deserve a chance to atone genuinely, not by feeding the public a false confession." He nodded, albeit shakily. They relayed the letter's contents to the DA's office. The official stance was firm. If Alistair cooperated with the legal process, the authorities would consider the possibility of him being a victim of entrapment, not the instigator. Signing Dahlia's letter, however, would damage his credibility. Together, they tore the offer in half. The next few days ticked by with agonizing slowness, each moment feeling like an extended breath. Fiona threw herself into planning for the baby's arrival, finalizing the nursery, washing tiny onesies that smelled of lavender detergent, making sure her hospital bag was ready in case she went into labor early. She found an odd sense of peace in these small tasks, a reminder that life moved forward despite the swirling chaos. Meanwhile, Dahlia's name appeared less frequently in social columns. Whispers suggested she was lying low, possibly preparing to flee under a new identity if the investigation closed in. Alistair's attorney suspected she might be negotiating with certain overseas enablers. The DA's office, for its part, worked faster than usual, eager to secure a high-profile conviction that would set an example for white-collar crime in the art world. With the finishing line in sight, Alistair decided to make a strategic public statement. Standing at a podium in the Harrington International headquarters, he acknowledged that serious financial irregularities had come to light in relation to certain art investments. He pledged full cooperation with authorities. Fiona, watching from home, felt her chest tighten. This was a humiliating moment for the man who once prided himself on having no blemish on his business record. It signaled a measure of humility that Alistair rarely displayed before. Soon, Fiona's phone buzzed with messages from acquaintances, some praising Alistair's honesty, others predicting his downfall. One text from Colette read, "At least he's doing the right thing now, Fee." Fiona sighed, wondering if the right thing, done so late, could truly redeem everything that had happened. That evening, while the city glowed beneath a glittering skyline, Fiona and Alistair sat side by side on their penthouse balcony. Fiona could barely see her feet past her belly, and Alistair gently rested a hand on the curved shape of their child. "I want to be here," he murmured, glancing toward her. "Not just for the baby's birth, but for every step afterward. Whatever the courts decide, I'm committed to making amends." Fiona searched his eyes. She saw genuine remorse. Perhaps at long last there was a sliver of hope amid the ashes of betrayal. The tension proved too much for Dahlia. In a final desperate act, she scheduled an impromptu press conference outside an art gallery she once headlined. Cameras captured a noticeably agitated Dahlia stepping up to a makeshift podium. She declared that she had been coerced into unethical deals by the Harringtons, who wanted an exotic face to cover up their own corruption. She tearfully recounted how Alistair seduced her, how Fiona bullied her behind the scenes, an outright lie that made Fiona fume. Fiona watched from the penthouse, rage building with every fabrication. Alistair's phone lit up with calls from concerned board members. Iris Caldwell texted, "We expected this. Let her talk. We have the proof." Then Dahlia dropped what she called the big reveal, a folder of documents she waved before the cameras. She claimed it exposed Alistair's direct orchestration of money laundering. "When the DA sees these," she hissed, "the Harringtons will be finished." Predictably, the media latched on. Speculation roared to life. Had Alistair lied in his official statements? Was Fiona complicit? And who exactly was Dahlia, victim or master manipulator? Frenzied reporters demanded immediate responses from Harrington International. Social media turned into a battlefield, with some calling for Alistair's arrest, others claiming Dahlia was a con artist out for revenge. That same evening, Fiona's body seized with a sudden contraction while she was in the kitchen. Her water broke, sending a shock through her system. Panic mingled with excitement. She knew the baby was coming, but the timing was surreal. Alistair rushed her to the hospital, heart thundering in his chest, ignoring every phone call. Dahlia's press conference be damned. Their child wasn't waiting. Surrounded by the bright lights and antiseptic smell of the maternity ward, Fiona's contractions escalated swiftly. Nurses ushered her into a birthing suite. Alistair stayed by her side, whispering encouragement as the minutes stretched into an intense few hours. Pain and anticipation fused into a blur. Even in that swirling chaos, Fiona felt an undeniable sense of purpose. There was new life on the horizon, one that demanded focus, overshadowing even the drama that threatened them outside those hospital walls. Finally, in the early hours before dawn, Fiona's cries of labor culminated in the arrival of a baby girl. Alistair's eyes filled with tears as he heard their daughter's first lusty wail. Nurses handed the tiny, wriggling infant to Fiona, who cradled her against her chest. Months of betrayal and heartbreak momentarily dissolved in the face of that miraculous new life. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but so was the gratitude. Fiona pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, inhaling that sweet newborn scent. She glanced up to see Alistair gazing at their child, awe etched across his features. He gently touched the baby's cheek with trembling fingers. "She's perfect," he whispered. For a few fleeting moments, it felt as if the world had paused. No Dahlia, no courts, no tabloids, just three people bound by unconditional love. Then reality intruded. Alistair's phone buzzed insistently. Reluctantly, he stepped into the hallway. Moments later, he returned, pale-faced. "Iris just heard from the DA's office," he said quietly. "It seems Dahlia's big reveal documents were partly forged. Investigators recognized inconsistencies in signatures and dates. She may have faked evidence to frame me." Fiona exhaled a shaking breath, holding her newborn close. Relief and anger battled inside her. Relief that Dahlia's final bombshell was blowing up in her own face. Anger that Dahlia had been so reckless as to fabricate legal documents, possibly risking both Alistair's freedom and the business's survival. "What happens now?" she asked, voice trembling from a mixture of fatigue and adrenaline. "They're moving to arrest her," Alistair said. "Iris thinks Dahlia might have already bolted. She can't talk her way out of forging official records." His words hung in the air, a bittersweet resolution to the scandal that had consumed them for months. Fiona pressed a soft kiss to their baby's head. Her tears were now tears of mingled joy and sorrow. She had yearned for closure, for an end to the chaos. In its place, she realized she'd gained something far more precious, a fresh start, anchored by the tiny miracle cradled in her arms. Outside, the city's neon lights surrendered to the pink glow of morning. And in that dawn, Fiona felt the stirring of hope. Last prompt: if you've stayed this long, comment "New Beginnings" to celebrate Fiona's baby and the journey ahead. In the aftermath, the DA pressed charges against Dahlia Chang on multiple counts, including attempted fraud and criminal conspiracy. Although Dahlia managed to flee the country briefly, international warrants were circulated, and her once glittering reputation in the art world turned to dust. Major galleries distanced themselves from her. Collectors trashed her name. Despite the Harrington empire suffering short-term losses from legal expenses and PR damage, it survived. Over the next several weeks, Alistair gave statements clarifying his role, emphasizing how Dahlia had expertly manipulated him. With the forensic evidence and testimonies from Gareth Stone and Owen Chang, it became clear Alistair hadn't orchestrated the crimes. He'd been a pawn, albeit a willing one, when it served his ambition. Meanwhile, Fiona spent her days caring for their infant daughter, whom they named Liliana Rose. Even as she changed diapers and soothed late-night cries, she remained laser-focused on the relationship with Alistair. In the quiet early mornings when Liliana dozed in her crib, Fiona and Alistair talked, truly talked, for the first time in months. They discussed trust, regret, and how to rebuild. Alistair began therapy to work through his fears of failure and the emotional void that drew him into Dahlia's arms. Fiona, too, sought counseling, determined not to bury her anger and heartbreak under a forced reconciliation. Step by step, they found a new rhythm. Fiona refused to return to the role of a complacent spouse. She made it clear that if Alistair ever slid back into deception, she wouldn't hesitate to walk away. With Liliana's future at heart, Alistair restructured parts of Harrington International, pledging full transparency in all business dealings. He also initiated new philanthropic ventures, determined to atone for the damage his poor judgment had caused. In the months that followed, the tabloids moved on to fresh scandals, and the Harrington name began to recover. While not everything was perfect, trust, once broken, takes endless patience and proof to heal. There was a sense that the worst was behind them. Standing in Liliana's nursery one afternoon, Alistair gently rocked his daughter, exchanging a quiet, hopeful smile with Fiona. In that shared gaze, they recognized that though their fairy tale romance had shattered, something more authentic might rise in its place. A second chance was not guaranteed, but it was possible. And in the grand tapestry of life, that small beacon of possibility was enough. Welcome, everyone, to our channel. Today's story will take you on an emotional roller coaster and leave you wondering, can a millionaire truly change his ways for the sake of love and family? In the ending, the most surprising twist comes when our once ruthless businessman discovers a new kind of success. One measured not in dollars, but in the trust and affection of a little girl. If you're eager to know exactly how this heartwarming conclusion unfolds, stick around and listen to the story in full. Trust us, you won't want to miss a single detail. Before we dive into the final moments, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more captivating stories and dramatic endings. Also, feel free to leave your comments below. Share your personal insights or let us know where you're tuning in from. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and prepare for a tale that proves some of life's greatest treasures aren't found in bank accounts. What happens when a millionaire runs into his ex-wife with a secret child? That question lingered ominously in the back of Jonathan Cross's mind the moment he caught sight of the woman who had once shared his name. Everything about him, every tailored suit, every carefully negotiated contract, every late-night meeting spent closing million-dollar deals, had been designed to reinforce a single truth. He was a man in absolute control. Yet as he lounged in the upscale lobby of the Beachview Grand Resort, sipping aged scotch in a plush armchair, all that composure threatened to unravel. The cause? A simple twist of fate that brought him face to face with Eva Langdon, the ex-wife he had not seen in 3 years, and the child clinging to her side. A child with the same dark, inquisitive eyes that peered back at Jonathan from his own reflection each morning. Initially, he thought it might be an illusion. Perhaps it was the soft lighting, or the distant piano melody weaving through hushed conversations in the lounge, playing a cruel trick on him. But the woman crossing the marble floor was undeniably Eva. She moved with the same poised grace he remembered so clearly, her brown hair swept back in a neat twist. By her side stood a little girl, no older than 3, wearing a floral sundress and gripping Eva's hand in that trusting way only a child could. It was the kind of moment that made Jonathan's heart pound, in a way none of his corporate negotiations ever had. Was it truly possible that this child could be his? He felt a heaviness in his chest that no sum of money could assuage. Over the years, Jonathan's greatest strength had been his business acumen, the uncanny ability to make lightning-quick decisions that multiplied his fortune and earned him a reputation as a decisive, powerful figure. Yet here he was, riveted by a mere glimpse of a small, curly-haired girl hiding behind her mother's leg. Suddenly, the magnitude of unanswered questions weighed on him. Had Eva actually kept a secret of this magnitude? His own child? 3 years prior, their marriage had ended with startling swiftness, the fractures between them too deeply set to mend. They had drifted apart under the strain of business demands, her quiet pleas for attention drowned out by his relentless drive for success. The divorce itself was almost clinical, lacking in dramatic court battles or drawn-out negotiations. Eva simply walked away one day, leaving a small, lonely echo in Jonathan's spacious penthouse. The fact that she never mentioned a pregnancy never once occurred to him, until now. His meticulously cultivated world of business deals and strategic foresight provided no blueprint for handling the unimaginable, discovering he might be a father. For the first time in memory, Jonathan hesitated. That single moment of indecision spoke volumes more than any thunderous argument could have. Time felt like it had slowed to a crawl, as if the universe had paused to watch him fumble with emotions he never expected to face. The lounge lights glowed in subtle golds and ambers, reflecting a serene elegance he was too agitated to appreciate, and the music that once calmed him now served only as a restless backdrop. In this swirl of fear, anger, and curiosity, Jonathan Cross inhaled slowly. It was as though every success he had ever achieved stood at attention, awaiting his next move. But this was no boardroom. This was personal, deeper, and more fraught than any corporate acquisition. Little did he know that over the next few days, everything he believed about love, responsibility, and family would be tested beyond the limits of logic he so cherished. That night, Jonathan found himself pacing the polished floors of his luxury suite, his mind trapped in the whirlpool of Eva's appearance and the child's piercing gaze. Long after the resort lights dimmed and guests retired to their elegant rooms, he remained awake, staring at the moonlit ocean through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sleep would not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, images of the little girl's face flashed before him. Her curious stare was an uncanny reflection of himself, and it unsettled him more than any high-stakes negotiation ever had. He'd spent a lifetime perfecting the art of moving on quickly. He prided himself on never looking back. From the very start of his career, he'd learned that the difference between the winners and the forgotten was the ability to adapt without remorse. Yet in this moment, memories of Eva flooded his thoughts. The way she used to smile during quiet mornings, the softness of her laughter that once filled their apartment, and her earnest pleas for him to take a break from his all-consuming work. He had always brushed those pleas aside. After all, success was a hungry master demanding constant attention. But had that very hunger blinded him to something monumental? An urgent voice inside him insisted he needed answers. Was the child, whose age aligned so suspiciously well, truly his daughter? If so, why did Eva hide her existence? Had she believed that telling him would have changed nothing, that he was too far gone in his obsession with wealth and achievement? Or had she feared he would try to claim the child out of a sense of cold obligation? By sunrise, Jonathan had settled on a plan. He might have been unprepared for fatherhood, but he was still Jonathan Cross, the man who never let uncertainty linger without action. He quickly showered, dressed in one of his impeccably tailored suits, and headed downstairs to find Ava and the girl. The resort was bustling with early risers who had come to enjoy the serene coastal views. Families were seated at various tables in the expansive dining area, children laughing as they pointed out the ocean through the tall windows. Jonathan scanned the room, each searching glance sharpened by adrenaline, until he finally saw her. Eva was there, seated at a small table near a sunlit corner. Her brown hair caught a soft glow in the morning light. Next to her was the little girl, ankles swinging beneath her chair, her tiny frame nearly swallowed by the plush cushions. Jonathan swallowed against the tension knotted in his throat. Approaching them felt like the greatest challenge he had ever faced. In business, he was fearless. But in matters of the heart, the stakes were higher and the rules were unclear. Drawing in a controlled breath, he walked toward their table. The child noticed him first, tilting her head in mild curiosity. Eva's entire body went rigid as she realized Jonathan was closing the distance, and a flash of apprehension crossed her features. He stopped a polite distance away, placing one hand on the back of a chair. His voice, usually so commanding in business meetings, emerged quieter now. "Ava," he said evenly, "we need to talk." Ava's lips pressed into a firm line, and the little girl, Sienna, Jonathan overheard a staff member call her, peered at him with wide, observant eyes. The weight of that stare challenged him to keep his composure. He glanced briefly at Sienna, noting the uncanny similarities. The delicate shape of her nose, the slightly wavy dark hair, and the glimmer of curiosity in her gaze. He couldn't tear himself from the thought. Was she truly his? The question was too big, too life-altering to ignore. Eva nodded stiffly and gently squeezed Sienna's hand. Her voice trembled slightly with unresolved tension. "Why don't we go somewhere private?" she suggested, trying to keep her tone neutral. A sense of relief washed over Jonathan that Eva was at least willing to talk. In that moment, he also recognized one of the first content-driven strengths of their unfolding story: heightened tension. This new, sharp tension was far deeper than any business rivalry. Here was a personal matter that demanded an emotional reckoning. They headed to a quieter spot in the hotel garden, where tropical plants formed a lush border around a wooden bench. Sienna waddled carefully next to her mother, her gaze flitting between the flowers and Jonathan's face, as though fascinated by both. Eva sat down first, gesturing for Sienna to stay by her side, and Jonathan stood a few feet away, uncertain how to begin. He'd never been at a loss for words, yet now his mind raced with confusion. At last, he cleared his throat and addressed the question that had nearly kept him up all night. "Is she mine?" There was no avoiding the ripple of fear and regret that crossed Ava's features. She looked at Sienna, and the little girl turned her attention to a cluster of vibrant blossoms, blissfully unaware of the adult's dilemma. Lowering her voice, Eva answered, "Yes, she's your daughter." The moment the word daughter passed her lips, Jonathan felt his heart pound erratically against his ribcage, as though every fiber of his being was rushing to process an overload of emotions. To call the sensation overwhelming was an understatement. He experienced disbelief, anger, and something profoundly protective stirring within him. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked, his voice hushed but urgent. "You had to know I'd want to be part of her life." Eva sighed, pressing her eyes shut for a second before responding. "Jonathan, you were so distant back then, so consumed by your empire, your dreams of conquering every market. I was terrified you'd only show up out of a sense of duty and then vanish when it got too difficult. Though her tone was soft, her words delivered a cutting insight. Jonathan knew that his drive for success had often overshadowed personal matters. But hearing Eva articulate her fear that he might abandon his own child stung in a way no business failure ever had. Sienna, perhaps sensing the charged atmosphere, wandered closer to her mother. Eva's protective arm wrapped around her little shoulders, making Jonathan acutely aware of all he'd missed in these past 3 years. Her first steps, her first words, all the small joys of early childhood. At that realization, he felt the second content-driven strength come into play, deeper emotional layers. This was no longer just about confronting an ex-wife. It was about confronting the father he had failed to be. Determined to make up for lost time, Jonathan softened his tone. He noticed Sienna glance at him, her big eyes brimming with a curiosity that was both innocent and cautious. He knelt down so he could see her at eye level, a gentle smile pulling at his lips. "Hi, Sienna," he said quietly, hoping to sound as non-threatening as possible. "I'm Jonathan." She studied him, clutching a small plush seahorse with a curious grip. For a long moment, she said nothing. Eva placed a reassuring hand on the child's back, whispering, "It's okay, sweetie." The tension was so palpable, Jonathan could almost feel it in the air. Finally, Sienna offered the slightest nod, but remained silent, returning her attention to the plush toy. It was an understandable reaction for a toddler suddenly confronted by a stranger who might be her father. Straightening, Jonathan turned his attention back to Eva, determined not to let the moment slip away. "I want to do this right," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I know I can't recover the years I've missed, but I want to be there for her now, for both of you." Eva observed him with a mix of skepticism and wistfulness that betrayed her inner conflict. Perhaps there was a part of her that wanted to believe Jonathan had changed, that he was truly ready for the responsibilities he once brushed aside. They agreed to keep talking over lunch, choosing a shady spot near the resort's oceanfront lounge. Sienna, occasionally chasing colorful birds across the courtyard, provided a sense of levity amid the heaviness of the conversation. Jonathan and Eva spoke in halting, sometimes awkward bursts. They had once been intimately familiar with each other's habits and hearts, but now they navigated every sentence like strangers stepping through unfamiliar terrain. Still, two important truths remained in plain sight. Jonathan was Sienna's father, and Eva had raised her alone. Eva recounted the early days of her pregnancy, how she discovered the news right as their marriage was unraveling, how she moved to a smaller apartment and found work teaching art classes, and how every day since Sienna's birth had been filled with both immeasurable joys and constant worries. Jonathan listened with rapt attention. He felt no desire to defend himself. His regrets spoke more powerfully than anything else could. For her part, Eva apologized for keeping Sienna's existence hidden. She revealed how she sometimes considered calling, but fear and pride held her back. The conversation was raw, and in that rawness, they both found an odd sense of relief. This candid exchange, although heartbreaking, signaled a chance at forging a new path. Jonathan recognized a third content-driven strength right in that moment: relatable character motivations. Both he and Eva had been shaped by pride, fear, and love, three elements that many people understand all too well. They were parents in crisis, trying to figure out how to create stability for a child who deserved more than a fractured family. By the time Sienna trotted back to them, clutching a tiny shell she'd found near the walkway, Jonathan saw an opportunity. He knelt down, asking quietly, "May I see your shell?" She offered it hesitantly. He smiled, tilting it in his palm and admiring its pearlescent shimmer. Then, with gentle care, he placed it back into her small hand. "It's beautiful, just like you," he said. Sienna let out a small giggle, a hopeful sign that perhaps someday she could trust him. The next few days ushered in a slow but profound transformation at the Beachview Grand Resort. Jonathan, who had arrived with plans for a short vacation, just enough time to catch his breath before finalizing a new corporate deal, found himself remaining longer than intended. Each day, he and Eva established a delicate routine that revolved around Sienna. Morning breakfast at the open-air cafe, midday walks along the shore where Sienna gathered shells and chirped excitedly about fish, and quieter evenings in the lounge, where she sometimes colored in a small book while Jonathan and Eva tentatively navigated their past. Jonathan surprised even himself by clearing his business schedule. Instead of checking company updates every hour, he was teaching Sienna how to build sandcastles or showing her the little fish that darted around the water's edge. The child's laughter had become an unexpected balm for his anxious spirit. He realized that success, at least the type that truly mattered, could not be measured by revenue alone. For the first time in years, he found satisfaction in something that wasn't tied to a bank statement or a stock portfolio. Still, progress was incremental. Sienna remained shy, peeking at Jonathan through her lashes before allowing any direct contact. On a good day, she'd let him hold a small pail while she shoveled sand into it or take her hand to guide her around sharp shells. On other days, she stuck to Eva's side, too uncertain to let Jonathan get close. Yet even these hesitations felt precious to him. In every aspect of his life, Jonathan was accustomed to immediate results. But here he discovered the fourth content-driven strength: satisfying character growth, the slow, steady building of trust and emotional connections that far surpassed any fleeting victory. One evening, when the setting sun turned the horizon into streaks of pink and orange, Jonathan found Eva in the garden courtyard, reading a storybook to Sienna. The child's eyelids were drooping as she fought sleep. Without disturbing them, he sat on a nearby bench, savoring the peaceful tableau. Eva's voice was gentle, rising and falling with the story's rhythm, and Sienna clutched that plush seahorse as if it were a lifeline to the world of dreams. In that tender snapshot, Jonathan realized how desperately he wanted to be part of their lives. Every bedtime, every sunrise, every mundane yet precious moment that strung together to form a family. When Eva finished reading, Sienna was nearly asleep, her head nestled against her mother's shoulder. Eva met Jonathan's gaze, her expression a tangle of relief and lingering apprehension. Over the soft hum of the ocean breeze, he spoke in a near whisper. "I'm not the man I used to be, Eva. I'd give everything up if it meant having the two of you in my life." His words emerged with a vulnerability that both surprised and humbled him. Eva didn't respond immediately. Instead, she carefully stood, Sienna cradled in her arms, and approached Jonathan. For a moment, he thought she might place the child in his arms, a gesture of profound trust, but she hesitated. "Let's go step by step," she said quietly. "I'm not saying no, Jonathan. I'm just saying that trust has to be earned, especially hers." Day by day, trust became their unspoken mission. Jonathan, who was used to forging alliances with handshakes and well-worded contracts, found fatherhood demanded something far more intangible: genuine presence. No amount of charm, money, or executive power could magically earn Sienna's confidence. It had to be built through consistent love and small everyday gestures that said, "I see you, and I'm here for you." And one afternoon, as the sun hung high and the waves glimmered under the bright sky, Jonathan arranged a small picnic on the sandy shore. It was a modest spread: fruit juice, a few sandwiches, and Sienna's favorite chocolate cookies. Eva hesitated at first, concerned that the wide-open space might unnerve their timid daughter. But Sienna seemed delighted by the idea, giggling at the notion of having lunch where she could watch the water splash against the shore. She especially loved seeing the small crabs scuttling nearby, a sight that made her squeal in delight and point with glee. Jonathan watched her with a quiet fascination, as though each moment revealed a new side of the daughter he was only just beginning to know. "You see that crab?" he said, leaning in to show her the creature more closely. "They're quick, but they get scared easily. Kinda like you were scared of me at first, huh?" His tone was playful, but Sienna looked at him, a thoughtful seriousness in her eyes before she nodded. Jonathan laughed gently, but inside he felt a surge of hope that she was acknowledging how far they'd come. Eva observed them with a mixture of apprehension and guarded optimism. Over the past few days, the tension between her and Jonathan had somewhat eased, replaced by a cautious camaraderie rooted in their love for Sienna. Occasionally, Eva would catch Jonathan gazing at their daughter with an expression bordering on awe, and she would remember the self-assured man who once dismissed her emotional pleas as distractions from his business empire. Now that man seemed intent on learning every quirk and preference of a wide-eyed child who was wary of him one moment and enthralled by him the next. That afternoon's picnic served as a microcosm of their new reality. Every small success, such as Sienna giggling at one of Jonathan's jokes or reaching out spontaneously to hold his hand, felt monumental, and every step backward, if Sienna became nervous or clammed up, reminded them that this fragile bond required consistency, not quick fixes. Their conversations about the future were equally delicate. Eva wasn't naive. She knew how demanding Jonathan's work was, and she wondered if his newfound devotion would hold once they left the idyllic cocoon of the resort. Jonathan, for his part, found himself questioning what success might look like if fatherhood became his top priority. Later in the day, when they returned to the hotel suite, Sienna clung to her plush seahorse in a contented doze. Jonathan offered to carry her. Though Eva was initially hesitant, she gently placed the little girl in his arms. The wave of emotion that washed over Jonathan was overwhelming. This precious life, so small and fragile, now asleep against his shoulder, trusting him enough to find comfort in his embrace. His throat tightened. Eva watched quietly, perhaps recalling the restless ambition that once defined him, now replaced by a tender side she hadn't witnessed in years. That evening, Jonathan sat alone on the terrace attached to his hotel suite, gazing out at the moonlit beach. The same scotch that once symbolized his corporate triumphs and after-hours deals now served as a contemplative companion to thoughts he'd never expected to have. His phone remained silent on the small table beside him. He had asked his personal assistant to handle all business inquiries for the next week. For once, he was choosing not to immerse himself in urgent emails or pressing deadlines. Instead, he was wrestling with an entirely different challenge, convincing Eva, and more importantly, Sienna, that he was in this for the long haul. He replayed the day's events in his mind. Sienna's shy laughter, Eva's guarded smile, the warmth of the sun on his face as they shared sandwiches and cookies on the beach. All of it felt both fragile and precious. He realized that, in a sense, he was negotiating the most critical deal of his life, the terms of his reintegration into Sienna's world. But a father-daughter bond wasn't something that could be hammered out in a contract. It was born of everyday kindness, of presence, of being there through both the trivial and the monumental. At one point, a gentle knock echoed against his door. He opened it to find Eva standing there, looking uneasy. Without speaking, she stepped onto the terrace, taking a spot beside him at the railing. The ocean breeze played with strands of her hair, and for a few moments they simply watched the rolling waves in shared silence. Finally she spoke, her voice soft. "Sienna asked about you when I was putting her to bed. She wanted to know if you'd say goodnight." A flood of emotions coursed through him. Gratitude, relief, and a trembling excitement he hadn't felt in years. "Really?" he asked, momentarily unsure if he'd heard correctly. Eva nodded, a small smile touching her lips. There was hope in her eyes, but it was tempered by caution, as if she still couldn't fully let down her guard. Jonathan breathed in the cool night air. "Eva," he began, choosing his words with care, "I know you're worried. I know you have every reason to doubt whether I can sustain this. But I promise I'm done being the man who lets every conference call and every board meeting overshadow what really matters." Her gaze flickered with a semblance of trust. "I want to believe you," she admitted, "but I also need to protect Sienna from any disappointment. She's the most important thing in my life." The unspoken reminder was clear. If he hurt their daughter, there'd be no second chances. Nodding, Jonathan said quietly, "I understand. I'm not expecting blind faith. I'm just asking for the opportunity to show you and her who I am now." For a long stretch, neither of them spoke. It was an admission of vulnerabilities, each acknowledging the scars that years of separation had inflicted. Eventually, they made their way down the corridor to Eva's suite. The soft glow of a nightlight illuminated Sienna's small form, snuggled under pale pink sheets. Jonathan approached cautiously, not wanting to disrupt her sleep, but Eva gently nudged him forward. He leaned down and whispered, "Good night, Sienna," hoping she might sense his presence even in slumber. Though she didn't open her eyes, her small hand twitched, and Jonathan felt his heart tighten. It was an almost imperceptible response, but it felt like her subconscious was acknowledging him. Eva observed from a few steps away, her arms folded, as though hugging herself for reassurance. Jonathan's gaze lingered on Sienna for another moment before he turned back. When his eyes met Eva's, a fragile but real moment of connection passed between them. He recognized it as a pivotal step, not a grand celebratory victory, but a meaningful milestone in the slow, careful dance of rebuilding a family. On the final day of their stay at the Beachview Grand Resort, dawn broke with the sky painted in peach and lavender hues, hinting at the promise of a fresh start. Jonathan rose early, feeling an unusual mix of serenity and anticipation. He dressed in casual clothes, a simple shirt and linen pants, that better suited the day's lighter mood. There were no pressing business matters, no imminent flight to catch. Instead, there was a lingering hope that the steps he'd taken would be the foundation for a more permanent change. By the time he made his way downstairs, Eva and Sienna were already at their usual table by the window, enjoying the tropical morning sun. Sienna bounced in her seat when she spotted him, her eyes brightening. It was a small moment, no wide-armed leap or exuberant shout, but the spark in her eyes spoke volumes of her growing trust. Jonathan allowed himself a smile that felt utterly genuine. He approached slowly, giving her space to invite him closer. She tilted her head in a silent welcome, a gesture that made Eva's guarded expression soften. Over breakfast, conversation flowed more easily. They talked about what Sienna liked back home, the park she often visited, and the small collection of stuffed animals she tucked around her bed. Jonathan found himself making mental notes, the name of her favorite ice cream flavor, which board games she enjoyed, and which bedtime stories made her squeal with delight. In these everyday details, he uncovered an entire universe of fatherhood he was only just beginning to explore. Later, they wandered along the garden path, thick with floral aromas. As they passed the resort's koi pond, Sienna insisted they feed the fish. With Eva's permission, Jonathan crouched beside his daughter, a small cup of fish food in hand. Together, they tossed tiny pellets into the water, laughing at the vibrant flash of fins. Sienna's giggle filled the air, a sound that, to Jonathan, held more value than any prestigious accolade. When the time came to check out, they gathered in the lobby. Suitcases stood by the door, and the sleek hotel staff went through the usual formalities. Jonathan snuck glances at Eva, trying to gauge how she felt about everything that had transpired over the last several days. She seemed contemplative, as though weighing the reality of stepping back into a normal routine. Would he keep his promise? Could they continue this fragile progress once they returned to their individual lives? After settling the bill, Jonathan stepped aside with Eva, leaving Sienna happily enthralled by a colorful aquarium near the reception desk. "I'd like to visit," he began carefully, "back home. I want to learn more about her life, her routines, her friends, everything. If that's okay with you, I'd like to find a place nearby, so I can see her as often as possible." Eva paused, blinking as though trying to process the request. Her expression was still tinged with uncertainty, but Jonathan could sense her resolve wavering. He was offering to abandon the jet-setting lifestyle that had once defined him, at least in part, to be near them. It was more than words. It was a tangible plan, a real commitment. Finally, she nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "I'd like that," she whispered. "She deserves to know her father." Jonathan exhaled, relief coursing through him like the warmth of the morning sun. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding his breath, awaiting her permission to be involved. Just then, Sienna trotted over, her tiny shoes tapping against the polished floor, holding out a tiny seashell she'd found who knows where in the lobby's potted plants. "For you," she said in her small voice. Jonathan took it, brushing a thumb over its smooth surface, the corners of his mouth tilting upward. "Thank you, Sienna," he replied softly. "I'll treasure it." And so, in the final moments of their stay, the three of them stepped out of the marble and glass confines of the resort, forging a hesitant but sincere bond that no contract could dictate. Through this unexpected journey, Jonathan had discovered that real wealth isn't always measured by digits in a bank account, but by the laughter of a child and the shared hope of a family determined to heal. And for the first time in years, he felt as though he'd found something worth sacrificing everything else to protect. If the lingering question on your mind is, what happens after the credits roll? You're in for a treat. Our story doesn't end with a simple farewell. It blossoms into a new beginning filled with hope and responsibility. You'll see how unexpected reunions can lead to life-changing realizations, and witness characters who evolve from fear to faith in something bigger than themselves. The millionaire's decision at the end marks not just a personal victory, but a promise that love and commitment can outshine any material gain. We hope this extra glimpse into our protagonist's journey warms your heart and sparks thoughtful discussions. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories that keep you glued to your screen, and leave a comment with your theories or personal experiences. Your voice makes our storytelling community stronger, and we're excited to hear from you. Stay tuned for more tales that blend drama, suspense, and unexpected twists. Stories that might just inspire you to look at life a little differently.